welcome to another episode of Iconic Freedom, the Formula. We are setting the standard for accountability and responsibility, the ownership of your choices and the consequences for those choices. Let each care for self, and all will be cared for.
Madam Vice President, you just laid out your economic vision for the future.
Yeah.
But still, there are lots of Americans who don't see themselves in your plans. For those who say these policies aren't for me, what do you say to them?
Well, if you are hardworking, if you have the dreams and the ambitions and the aspirations of what I believe you do.
So there's going to be a lot of word salad going on in this particular interview. I put the link down in the description so you can watch the full thing. This really is about interviewing the interviewer. So I am not going to comment too much on some of the substance of Kamala, of which there's very little. It's a lot of repetitive stuff that you've seen on other interviews with her. The thing with Stephanie, though, is she has an interesting type of approach. She's very direct in some of her questions, which I like. However, there are a couple of times where she doesn't do a follow-up. I don't know what her motivation is in not doing that. I will tell you that I have fact-checked several things in this interview, and Stephanie either is ignorant to the information and never researched it, or she's deliberately lying. So one or the other, and when I reach those moments, I'll point those out to you.
Over the last 4 years, there have been tremendous economic wins, and you've just laid out a big plan. But still, polling shows that most likely voters still think Donald Trump is better to handle the economy. Why do you think that is?
Well, here's what I know in terms of the facts.
What I think is interesting is that Kamala immediately goes, here's what I know, based on the facts. And then she goes and tells a bunch of lies. I'm just going to say, as a voter, you would do yourself a very good justice to go and fact check all of these things that she says. Literally this morning, as I was clipping this up, I would go in and I would, Lordstown in Ohio, and I would fact check that. Or, she made a comment earlier on X about, President Trump was saying something about punishing women that had abortions. That's not true. They, fact checked that. And the reality is that Trump said the doctors that if there was a national abortion ban, if it was against the law, that you would punish the doctors. He had no desire to punish women. Anyways, my point is made is that, and I went on to Stephanie Rhul's thread on X, and I posted several different things with, I brought the receipts. I put links and everything for her to look at it and go, hey, this is a lie. And it's like, don't you care about your own integrity? So it's interesting. Okay, so she asked the question, access to opportunities. I mean, why, and, why we know is a question that it's a lie, right? Kamala says in the interview, that you're going to have access to, opportunities. And then she tries to manipulate the language to victimize Americans. And then off she goes into her word salad and repetitive stories. It's a premise, Stephanie asked a question that it's a premise that's somewhat good. You're going to see that she did push back when Kamala made the lie about COVID and shutting down the economy.
Donald Trump left us with the worst economy since the Great Depression when you look at, for example, the employment numbers.
It was during COVID, and employment was so high because we shut down the government, we shut down the country.
Even before the pandemic, he lost manufacturing jobs by most people's estimates, at least 200,000. He lost manufacturing plants, ask the auto workers.
Again, so another fact check. So I actually was watching Kudlow and Company yesterday, and they got on there and they were talking, and Larry Kudlow was actually in the administration. And what they said is not only is that a lie, but Donald Trump had actually, prior to 2020, had actually created more than 400,000 manufacturing jobs. So not really sure where she's pulling that information from, but I'm guessing that she's, counting on the fact that Stephanie either doesn't know the facts or she's not going to fact check her. Something that's very interesting, though, is that when Stephanie pushed back with the COVID, immediately the VP launches into her response, which when she does that, you can tell it's a rehearsed answer. And how can you tell? Because she started to answer before Stephanie completed her thought. Before Stephanie's complete thought was out, she'd already gone down that road. And a lot of times you can tell when someone has rehearsed something. Well, two things. If they've rehearsed it or they're emotional about something, they won't even let you finish your sentence.
Then let me ask you about taxes, because lots of people will say, I don't like Donald Trump, but he cut my taxes. He didn't just cut corporate taxes, he cut individual taxes. Now that expires next year, and there's some people confused saying, I don't know what's going to happen next year. Under a Harris administration, at what income level should someone expect their taxes to go up? And that state and local tax deduction that's currently capped and matters to a lot of people in blue states, are you going to lift that cap?
So, first of all, when it relates to anybody making less than $400,000 a year, your taxes will not go up. Your taxes will not go up. And in fact, under my plan, taxes for 100 million Americans will actually be cut, including $6,000 a year for young couples for the first year of their child's life in a tax cut, a tax credit, essentially, by expansion of the child tax credit. And why is that? Because during the first year of a young couple, of a person's child's life, they're going to need help buying a crib, buying a car seat. And we all benefit when they're actually able to do what they naturally want to do to take care of their child.
And expanding that child tax credit, or you mentioned housing before, giving that extra money for a first home. If you can't raise corporate taxes, or if GOP takes control of the Senate, where do you get the money to do that? Do you still go forward with those plans and borrow?
Well, but we're going to have to raise corporate taxes, and we're going to have to make sure that the biggest corporations and billionaires pay their fair share. That's just it. It's about paying their fair share. I am not mad at anyone for achieving success, but everyone should pay their fair share. And it is not right that the teachers and the firefighters that I meet every day across our country are paying a higher tax than the richest people in our country.
Bill Gates just said it this week. If he was in charge of taxes, he would have paid more. But how do you find that line to make sure corporations are paying their fair share, but they're not leaving our country?
Well, listen, I work with a lot of CEOs.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here, but hopefully I can keep it efficient. First of all, what I think is kind of interesting is she goes into a place where she says everyone needs to pay their fair share. Now, Stephanie did really good, I thought, because she pushed back on her and said, hey, listen, these are all, these gimmies basically are all, this is great pie in the sky. However, if you don't have a Senate and a House that's going to be able to pass this stuff, so then what do you do? And I think her answer is really kind of like, it's remarkable in that, she's kind of stupid in that sense. And unfortunately, Stephanie did not push back on her on this, where she said, well, everyone's going to have to pay their fair share. Okay, but what is that fair share? You need to say what that amount is. What is that amount? Years ago, there was an interview with John Stossel and that reverend whose name escapes me at the moment. But, they were talking about that, and that was the same thing as Sharpton, and said something about, you need to pay your fair share. And so Stossel says, what is your fair share? And he says, oh, it needs to be, like 15%, 10%. I mean, he's just kind of meandered through it. And so then Stossel says, well, it's actually 34% that the top percentage is, the top 1% or whatever pay. And then Sharpton didn't have anything to say. And he tried to meander out of it and talk about quality of their life and the choices they're making. So my thing is that it would have been really good if Stephanie had pushed at her and said, wait a minute, you're talking about fair share. What is fair share? So she didn't kind of jump on that, which I think would have been a good one. At some point, the VP talks about Goldman Sachs and all this other stuff. But, I mean, she's kind of deaf to Americans because most Americans don't care about that. They don't care about Wall Street and all that shenanigans. Their thing is, trying to work the day to day. Listen, when I lived in New York, I watched a lot of people. They were just trying to get through their day to get on the subway and get home. I don't think a lot of those people really cared about what was going on Wall Street.
For people who want to buy a home, yes, getting a $25,000 kicker would be great. But it's not just affording a home. We don't have enough in this country.
You're absolutely right.
And one of the main problems are regulations and rules, strict rules at a local level. How does the federal government cut through all that red tape and get down to, the suburbs of Pittsburgh and say, we're going to have to build some affordable housing here? How do you connect the two?
So you're absolutely right. So across our country, people rightly are concerned about the cost of housing. So it's home ownership, to your point. We need more supply. That is.
So again, I think Stephanie asks a really good question. I don't think that I heard somebody else say something similar to this about Stephanie, that she's not like Dana Bash. She is not like those folks that were on the debate. And how they managed that whole situation. She wasn't even like that affiliate in Philadelphia. And she wasn't like Oprah. I mean, Oprah just kind of gave her, her own, forum to talk and didn't question her. I mean, didn't really challenge her in any way. Where Stephanie is really doing her best to try to challenge her. The thing that becomes revealed about it when you listen to it is whether or not a candidate understands what is supply and demand. And some of those concise questions, and I don't know if this is her style or maybe she doesn't understand it. I'm starting to wonder if Stephanie understands economics, because when you're talking about there being a supply and demand issue, then you got to talk about how do you increase that supply. And this is the thing that President Trump has been talking about, is it releasing all of the energy. You got to get that energy out. You got to get it going so that, things can be made, things can be created, jobs can be created, all these other things in order to make that happen. But she didn't really talk about that. So again, I don't know if that's like her own illiteracy or if she's just shilling for Kamala. But I will tell you, she is doing a much better job than those other interviewers were.
For working people.
Then let me ask you a business that matters a lot to this town.
Yeah.
U.S. Steel.
Yes.
Right? When you think Pennsylvania, when you think Pittsburgh, you got the Liberty Bell in Philly, and you got U.S. Steel in Pittsburgh.
That's right.
A Japanese company wants to buy them. You are opposed to this idea. Many people are. But if the deal doesn't go through, they have said people could lose jobs, they could close mills, they could leave the state of Pennsylvania. I mean, that is like moving the Liberty Bell to Newark. So which is more important?
Okay, so here's where I think Stephanie really starts to go off the rails, because she starts emoting her questions. She starts bringing in a bunch of other information that, to be honest, isn't really relevant to the question. What we really want to know from this presidential candidate, and it would be her or Donald Trump, what are your thoughts about an outside country trying to infiltrate this country by buying something that a lot of people would see as a threat to their own job? And just so you know, that's a lot of why people talk about tariffs and everything, because of that very reason. So in that instance, if you go back and listen to it again, you'll start to hear she starts to go into these stories, and people start talking stories. It's like, we don't care about your story because you're trying to speak to an emotion, and we don't care about the emotion. We care about facts.
Steelworkers matter in this country. Unions matter.
Yes.
In 2016, Donald Trump connected with unions. He saw them. There was an emotional connection. But what he didn't do was deliver policy. In the last 4 years, we have seen huge wins in this country for unions, but not all unions have gotten behind you. I want to understand, when the Teamsters decided not to endorse you, what was their reasoning? What are they looking for?
Look at Lordstown. He said he was going to...
Don't sell your homes.
Yeah, don't sell your homes. And what happened? It shut down. Outsourcing under Donald Trump. His policies that are about putting, tens to...
Okay, so here we are again, where, again, Stephanie is leading the witness with an emotional type of question. And she even references how Donald Trump connected to these people and all that other kind of stuff. The thing about asking those kinds of questions is that for somebody like the VP, that's where she lives constantly. And, if you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you know that your emotions are not a place to live. But that's where she plays her word salad and kind of plays the manipulative game with all of that shenanigans. Again, you can go in and you can debunk all of this stuff. I will see if I have a couple of videos that I can post underneath in the comment section so that you can go check those out yourself. When I look at this kind of stuff, I do say it quite often on social media. If it wasn't for lying, they would have nothing to say.
Can I ask you about tariffs? Because you just mentioned it. It's not just with one company. Donald Trump's sort of big idea is this broad-based tariffs across the board. You and many others have said that would be not only disastrous, but it would be a direct tax on the American consumer.
It would be a sales tax on the American people.
Tariffs aren't unique to President Trump. President Biden has tariffs in place. He's actually looking to potentially implement more. Where do you come out on? Is there a good tariff, a bad tariff?
Well, part of it is you don't just throw around the idea of...
With this particular line of questioning, again, it would have been easier if Stephanie had just said, what is your position on tariffs? And then let her talk about it. When she starts going into her diatribe and she's explaining things about Trump or anything, then what's happening is that she is basically, kind of giving the VP, again, leading the witness in that sense, because then she's not thinking for herself and she's not coming up with the answers for herself. If you were just to say, what's your position on tariffs? Then you can hear exactly what her thoughts are. She would have to start from, a position of one and be able to tell you, well, here are what my thoughts are regarding tariffs and blah, 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 blah. But she doesn't do that. And unfortunately, with so many of these interviewers, I don't know if they're like getting, notes from these people, the campaign prior to, saying, hey, stick with these things, or if you can, present the questions in this manner. I can't believe that so many different interviewers are really this stupid. I mean, to be honest, because it just all seems so disingenuous.
Serious problem over the last few years has been inflation. Luckily, it's cooling, but prices are still high.
Yeah, I agree with you.
You've said you want to take this on by going after those who engage in price gouging.
Yeah.
But as somebody who supports free markets, who's a capitalist, how do you go after price gouging without implementing price controls? Because once we get in this zone, people start to get worried and they say, I don't know what she stands for.
And of course, here we are again. Stephanie is coaching her through the question on how to answer it. And the reality is that the VP has made a statement already about price gouging and all that stuff. So, why didn't she just say, how are you going to deal with inflation? What are your steps, concrete and specifically, that you're going to do? And then see what she says. And she can always come up with a follow-up question to say, well, you've spoken about price gouging. What exactly does that mean? Can you articulate that for the American people? And then can you articulate the steps that you would take in order for you to change that? And then see where it goes. Again, with all the coaching and everything, you're not really getting a clear picture. I mean, you can watch the interview yourself and see all the word salad. That's always there. But as far as trying to bring any cognitive comprehension to anything, that's just not happening.
On Friday, you are going to the border. Immigration is complicated. One of the issues is an economic one. And no one is eating cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio, and I'm glad not to be talking about that. But there are people there that are stressed, that feel that they're at capacity. Communities around the country that have legal immigration, many have said, we're at capacity. And many feel like the government has said to them, well, adapt, sit down, be quiet. This is how it is. What would a Harris administration do for those communities who've taken in many, many legal immigrants but are at capacity?
And then finally, wrapping this portion of it up, you can see again, she's sitting there exasperated, making the comment to the VP, fortunately, nobody's talking about cats and dogs. And the thing is that she's just becoming an editorialist at this point, and she's just giving opinion. She's not talking about facts. I mean, I guess if you want to do an Oprah-esque type of interview where, not a whole lot is being discovered, then you would do it the way Stephanie has done it. And I think she does the American people an injustice by going down this road and by playing this game and playing emotions, because it doesn't serve us. Facts and figures serve us. They're the things by which we can make decisions. Emotions do nothing for us. If you're a person that lives in your emotions, it's toxic, and we've talked about it. What does it do? It shoots through your bloodstream, it pollutes your bloodstream, and as it gets to your brain, it pollutes your brain. You lack cognition, you lack comprehension, and you're not going to be able to think clearly. I mean, that is the reality. Now, if that's the life you want to live, then that's up to you. More power to you. But if you're looking to live a life of accountability and responsibility, setting your own standard and doing no harm to others, then facts and figures are where you're going to want to be.
And I'd like to understand from you what Trump-era immigration policies have been banned, ended, reversed, and if any investigations are underway by you.
So we have rescinded so many Trump immigration policies. It would take so much time to list them.
Obviously, for anybody who watched the interview I did with Vice President Harris, we sat down for 25 minutes and we talked about one single topic: the economy. It is the number one issue for voters. If Donald Trump would like to sit down and have that same conversation, I'm ready for you. And I think it's hugely important, and it's a vulnerability for both candidates. But it's really tricky, Joe, because, you obviously want to cover all of these topics, but to just do it with one candidate, it's hard because many people feel like she's speaking in platitudes. She's speaking about an economic vision, and she's not giving details. She's got an 80-page detailed policy proposal. And do I think that she answers every single question and gives people exactly what they want? She doesn't. You know why? Because she's a politician. And none of them do. They all speak in platitudes. But Donald Trump has given absolutely nothing except mass deportations, which would be a huge issue for our economy. And he just says, I delivered you the best economy ever, and I'm going to put across, blanket tariffs. But the thing that I think she needs to answer for more is, despite all of the economic wins over the last 4 years, despite the fact that Donald Trump emotionally connected with that blue collar worker, but he didn't deliver for that blue collar worker. She needs to solve for why he still polls better on economic issues with voters, because that to me is mind-boggling. You know, when you talk to voters across the board, they often say, I don't know what any politicians do for me, but I did get my taxes lowered. And she made it clear, when the individual tax cuts expire next year, the one group of people who will get their taxes raised are people who make over $400,000 a year. Now, a lot of people in blue cities and blue states are wondering what happens to that state and local tax deduction. Donald Trump has now said, we're going to lift that cap. He's the one who put it on. We don't yet know what she's going to do.
Talk about that answer.
I do, but here's what's a little tricky. She doesn't answer the question around, if the GOP is controlling the Senate, if she can't raise corporate taxes, where is she going to get the money from, to expand the child tax credit and do all the things she wants to do? And she says, we just have to do it. And that's great, and that's a campaign promise. But the issue is, if it means we're just going to borrow again, then what we're doing is we're just never addressing the deficit. And back in the days when you were a proud Republican, debts and deficits matter.
Reproductive rights will be a big issue in the next presidential election. And President Biden's re-election campaign just released an ad attacking Donald Trump's position on abortion. Paul Spey checks its claim for PolitiFact.
Does Donald Trump want to punish women who get abortions? That's what President Biden's campaign suggests in a new ad. Take a look.
Do you believe in punishment for abortion? Yes or no, as a principle?
The answer is that there has to be some form of punishment.
For the woman?
Yeah, there has to be some form.
Trump did make those comments during an interview 7 years ago. And that same day in 2016, he issued this clarification saying that if there were ever a law making abortion completely illegal, he'd support punishments for doctors, but not the woman. He said in that interview he misspoke. And since then, we haven't found any other examples of him saying he wants to punish women who get abortions. He is taking credit for overturning Roe v. Wade, and he says he supports exceptions for rape, incest, and the mother's health. And recently, Trump even criticized an opponent in the Republican primary, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, for banning abortion after the 6th week of pregnancy. Now, on Meet the Press, when he asked if he would support a ban at the 15th week, here's what he said.
I'm not going to say I would or I wouldn't. I mean, DeSantis is willing to sign a 5-week and 6-week ban.
Would you support that? You think that goes too far?
I think what he did is a terrible thing and a terrible mistake.
This is a classic case of cherry picking. Yes, Trump said those words from the Biden ad, but he quickly retracted them. And over the last 7 years, we've seen no other evidence that they reflect his position on abortion. And that's why the Truth and Media rates this ad mostly false. Read the full fact check at WRAL.com.
I thought that some of those clips would be kind of interesting to hear. Basically, you're getting a different viewpoint once people get away from the VP or they get away from Trump and they're able to speak a little more openly. You can still hear all of the emotion that people want to throw into all of these subjects. And I just think the more that they do that, the more they're polluting the information for the American people to make a decision. I think it's very interesting that, Stephanie in that first clap back there where she was discussing everything with Mika and Joe, that, she's making statements about Trump, but it's just like, this isn't about Trump. These interviewers need to understand, which they are not, is that, look, this is not about Trump. You could sit there and point to somebody else's behavior all you wish. And I was saying this to my friends last night, that it's like pointing to somebody else's behavior as a reason for your behavior is ridiculous. It's just stupid. It's you avoiding accountability and responsibility. Ask the questions where she needs to be accountable and responsible. I had put a TikTok video out earlier this week that talked about concrete and specifically, where is she able to say that she has made a transition regarding the Second Amendment? She should be able to tell us that, right? She should be able to say, here was my thought process. Here are all the things that have changed in that thought process. Here's my new position on that. If you can't do that, then all you're doing is kind of blathering at us, and blah, blah, blah is all we hear, because we would not have any confidence in what you're doing. Because why? We see an inconsistency. And instead of people saying, oh, that's not fair or that's not fair, look at it in terms of whether they're being consistent or inconsistent. Who cares about what's fair, what's not fair? That's so subjective. But what is consistent and what is inconsistent? And what everyone can see regarding her, the VP, is that she is inconsistent. And I think Bernie had mentioned it previously that he made a comment about her, that her values haven't changed. She's just doing whatever she needs to do in order to get elected. Okay, then. There you have it. And of course, that music again means we are at the end of another podcast. Thank you so much for joining me this week, and I hope you enjoyed this. We'll continue to do Interview the Interviewer as we go along. Hey, hit that like button if you would. Share it with your family and friends. You never know how it might help them in their journey. All the good stuff is down below. Click on any of those links, and I'll see you next week. Let each care for self, and all will be cared for.